Today's daf Yomi is Shevuos Mem Hey, Shevuos 45. We're going to start on 45a, 7 lines from the top. Today's daf is dedicated for Shmir for the Chayalim, Atzalah for the Shvuyim, Yeshua for Am Yisrael. And it says Tzara. The daf Yomi tells us that there are certain categories of people, says the Mishnah, who normally you take an oath and you're exempt from having to pay. But this is a category. There are certain people who are the exception. They're nishba'in u'mishalman. They take an oath and they suddenly have to pay. Meaning to say, nishba'in v'notlan. They take an oath and then they get to take the money after having taken the oath. Nishba'in v'notlan. And one of those people, we're going to go through the categories that they listed. One is the Chanvani al Pincasso, that a shopkeeper on his ledger. So the shopkeeper on the ledger, he's an example of somebody who is, we're going to say, he's nishba the notel. He takes an oath and then he gets to take the money. So what's the example of the shopkeeper on his ledger? Ketzad. Well, it's not that he says, that's not an example of where he gets to take an oath and take the money, where he says, it says in my ledger that you owe me 200 zuz. Rather, the case is, Omer Tainli Livni Sasayim Chitin. Tainli Poali Selamos. The case is where a person said to the shopkeeper has money, he said, give my son 200 pieces of wheat, or give my worker, pay my worker. And the shopkeeper says, Hu Omer Nasati. The shopkeeper says, I gave the money. And they say, we didn't get the money. So he says he gave it. A third party says he gave it. The shopkeeper says, I gave it. The other people say, I didn't get it. So then under those circumstances, hu nishba v'notel v'hei nishba v'notlan. Both the shopkeeper swears and takes the money from the employer or the father, and the son or the employee takes an oath and takes the money from the employer as well. So in both those cases, they're both nishba v'notel. Amar ben Nanas says, what are you talking about? Ketzad elu ve'elu ba'in lidei shvuas shav. As a result of this, one of them is for sure lying. Either the shopkeeper did not give the money, or they did not get the money. But it's not possible that he gave the money and they did not get the money. So one of them is lying. And so therefore, since we don't want to make it that for sure there was a lie being said in the court, both the shopkeeper and the employer and the son or the employee can take the money without an oath. Did you have a question, Bill? No, that wasn't the problem. The problem was the false oath. There wasn't a problem of the double payment. That wasn't what was bothering Ben Nanas. The double payment is because it's this guy who made the agreement with each of those parties. They don't have the agreement with either other one. The employer or the father is the one who made an agreement with both of these parties. So he's the one who's responsible. He entered into the agreement with them. Next case. Amr Chanvani, Tainli Bedinar Payros. So he says to the shopkeeper, he says, give me food that's worth the value of a dinar. V'nasan lo. And so the shopkeeper gave it to him. Amar lo, Tainli Oso dinar. This has happened. This is, the mother told me this happened to her one time when she was working in her father's store. So the person says to the shopkeeper, give me food that's the equivalent of a dinar. And the shopkeeper gave him the food. And then Amarlo, then he says to the person, Ten li oso dinar, give me my money. Amarlo, nisati v'cha. So the person who was the customer says, I already gave it to you. V'nasato b'ampuli. And you put it in your wallet. Yishava Balabayas and Nasalo as a dinar. The Balabayas just has to take an oath that he gave him the money and he's going to be exempt. So, meaning to say, biblically speaking, he doesn't have to. But Rashi says he takes a rabbinical, Shevuos Hesis, because this is a case of Kofar Akol, he denies everything, and so therefore he's exempt, but rabbinically speaking, we make him take an oath. Let's say he says, Amro Otelias Aperos, he says, so let's say the Balabaya says to the shopkeeper, give me my food that I bought. He says, I gave you, took it home. The shopkeeper takes the oath. Again, it's Shevuos Hatzis. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Kol Shaperos Biyado Yado Al Yona. Whoever has the food in his hand, he's got the upper hand. So Rashi explains he's arguing in the first case where it says the Yeshava Baal Bayis should not know at the dinar, meaning to say on the first case. So Rashi's saying that he's arguing about the first case. So whoever has the fruit in his hand, where we said the Balabaya should came and say that he gave him the dinar. In that case, we had said in the Mishnah that the Balabayas, hold on one second, says that he should take an oath that he gave him the dinar and then he'll be exempt. But Rabbi Yehuda comes along. No, it says since the Balabayas already got the fruit, also Rabbi Yehuda L'Meimer ain't Sarach Shvua. That the Rabbi Yehuda comes along to say that the Balabayas doesn't even need an oath. She'ein derech chanvani amocher shalo ba'akafa l'tenes haperos ad shekabel as dinar, because it's not the way of the shopkeeper who sells something without credit to give the fruits until he gets the dinar. So he says the customer doesn't even have to take an oath. Next case, Amar Shochani, Tainli Bedinar Mos. He says to the money changer, give me these copper coins to the equivalent of a dinar, meaning to say, I'm giving you gold, you give me copper. The Nasan Lo, and the money changer gave him the money. The Amar Lo, and he says to the customer, Tainli as a dinar, give me my money. Amar Lo, Nisati V'cha. So the customer says, I already gave it to you, Nisatu Bampoli. And you put it in your wallet, Yeshava Balabayas. Then the Balabayas has to take the oath that he gave it to him. Nasan Lo as a dinar, V'amar Lo, Tainli as a mos. So let's say the customer gave the money and he says to the money changer, give me the money. He says, I already gave you, put in your wallet. Yeshava Shochani. Money changer takes an oath that he gave it to him. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Ein derech Shochani litain Isar achi tol dinar. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, we don't assume that. We assume that it's not the manner of the money changer to have given the money until he got it back. And so since he already gave the money changer to the Baal Bayis, it's obviously the case that he already gave him the money. And so therefore the customer doesn't even have to take a Shevuos Hatzis. He's exempt completely. So the first part of the Mishnah, we brought cases that the person who's taking the oath, the plaintiff, had no claim whatsoever. But the Chachamim said that he gets to take an oath and take the money. But now the Mishnah brings several circumstances where he's allowed to take it even without an oath. And nevertheless, the rabbis instituted that before he takes it, even though he's allowed to take it without an oath, he first has to take an oath. So we say, Kishem sha'amru hapogemes ksubasa lo tipara ela b'shua. Just like we said that a woman who admits that her ksuba was impaired, meaning to say she admits that part of her ksuba was already paid, she can't collect the remaining part except with an oath. So too, the eid echad me'ido shi perua. So too, if a witness says that the ksuba was paid, lo tipara ela b'shvua, then she cannot collect the rest of it. If there is one witness that says that the ksuba was paid, even though one witness is not sufficient, nevertheless, she has to take an oath. And so too, even though a woman can use the ksuba to collect from in the chasim shubadim, from property, the ksuba is a lien on everything. It's a bond on the estate. And if property was sold, she has a lien on it, and she could really come along and seize that property. So if she's trying to claim the property that she has a right to take from the property that was sold, she has to take an oath. And also, if she wants to collect from an estate, even though she has a right to do it from her ksuba, she has to take an oath. In all those cases, even though she has a right to do it without an oath, we make her take an oath. V'chein hayisomim also the children, the heirs of the estate who want to collect the debts of their father, lo yiparu ela b'shvua. They have to take an oath. And they say they have to take an oath. Shvua shelo pakadnu abba. They have to say an oath that our father didn't tell us before he died that this was paid. V'lo amar lanu abba v'shalom atzinu bein shtarosav sho abba. And he didn't tell us anything about this, and we didn't find any notes shtars at parua that this is paid. Rabbi Yochanan Broka Amar afilu noad ben la'achar misasa'av. Even in a case where there's no way the child could have known while his father was alive, because the child was born after the father died, he still has to take an oath, and only then can he take it. If there are witnesses that the father said before he died, this note is not paid, no total. He again can take it without an oath. And this goes back to what we said earlier, because we assume that he wouldn't be lying, because a person's not going to lie if he doesn't get any benefit from it. And now there are some people who get to take an oath even though the other person doesn't make a claim against them. We force them to take an oath. Hashutfin va'arisin. Let's say you have workers that are working other people's land, and the intent was to divide, to split with the owners the results, the produce of the land according to their partnership. Like it was usually 1/3 for the sharecropper and 2/3 for the owner. So they have to take an oath that this is that this is fair, even though they didn't specify it. Patropsin, and also an executor that was appointed to manage the estate. It's a woman who's managing the household after her husband dies. So she's really only entitled to the ksuba, but she's managing the estate. She has taken oath that she didn't misappropriate it. And so too, one of the brothers that's dealing with the estate, he has taken oath. Amar lo, so the Mishnah says, these oaths, ma'ata to'anani. So if the partner says to his friend, says to the other one, what's your claim against me? Ritzoni shetishavali, meaning to say, I'm suspicious that you took money that's not yours. So then we say chayiv. Then he has to take an oath. Cholko ashutfin varis. And let's say the sharecroppers and the partners split the money. Each one takes his share, and nobody took an oath. Ein yachol ashpio. They can't make him come back afterwards to take an oath. This galgal oshvumi makom acher. But if they have to take an oath from another place, the galgal won't have us a call. Then we can make him take an oath about this. V'ashviyas mishametes es hashvua. And the sabbatical year cancels the obligation to have to take an oath. Says the Gemara, Kol nishban shebetorah nishban v'lo mishalman. All the oaths of the Torah, you take an oath and you don't pay. Minon, what's the source for this? The Amar Kra, the pasuk says, what's the source for the idea that all the oaths in the Torah, you take an oath and you don't pay? Because the pasuk says, V'lakach ba'alav v'lo yishalem. That it says with respect to a shomer sachar, that if the object is lost, that the owner of the deposit should take the oath, and then should receive the oath that he takes, and then lo yishalem, and then the person doesn't have to pay. So he takes an oath, doesn't have to pay. Mishalav shalem, one who has to pay, lo shavua. He is the one who takes the oath. The elu nishban v'notzlan, these are the ones who take the oath and then get to take the money. And we say that it's the worker. The worker, one of the cases is a worker who hasn't been paid. He takes an oath and he takes the money. So says the Gemara, Ma'ishna Sachir, the Takinule Rabbanan, the Mishtaba V'Shaka. What's the reason why the worker, the rabbis instituted that he takes an oath and then takes the money? I'm Rabbi Yehuda Mishmuel, Halachos Gedol Shanukan. There was a giant halacha, a great halacha that we learned here. Halachos, you're saying, Hani Hilchos Aninu? Is this a law from Moses at Sinai? Elaima, Takanos Gedol Shanukan. A great reform the rabbis made here. Gedolos? Gedolos Mikati Kaktanas, you mean there are great reforms and not minor reforms? So Gedolos Elam Rav Nachman Shmuel Takanos Kavur Shanakan, a fixed law they established here. Akru Rabbanon Shmuel Mi Balabayis V'Shaju Asachir. Really, the Balabayis, the employer, is the one who's supposed to take the oath here and be exempt. The rabbis uprooted it and put it on the hired worker. Mishum Kidei Chayav, in order to support him. They wanted to support him. And so therefore they wanted to make the worker have his parnasa. So therefore they said that he gets to take an oath and take his money. So the Gemara says, well, what are you talking about? Mishum k'dei chayav desachir konsina le labala bayis, because we want to have this worker make a living. Therefore we penalize the employer. That's not fair. That's going to destroy the economy. Nobody's going to hire anybody. So the Gemara says, no. Balabayas, I wish Diana was here today. She would have what to say. Balabayas gufe nichole de mishtabet sachar v'shakel. No, the employer wants the worker to take the oath and then take the money. Why? Kiechi disgaron le'polen, so that he has a ready labor pool. Gemara says, Adarabba, just the opposite. Sachir nichole de mishtabet balabayas v'nafka. No, the worker wants the employer to take an oath, and then it'll be exempt. He wants employers to have economy, to have good business, so that they'll keep hiring people. No, that's not necessary. The employers know that they need to hire people. They're not going to shut it down. Well, the employee, he needs a job regardless. So they cancel each other out. You could bring this into the minimum wage debate. It's the same argument. Go round and round. Ella Balabayas Tard B'Po'afu. So what's the reason why the Balabayas doesn't take the oath? He's too busy with his workers. He's not aware if he took the oath. And so therefore we allow the worker to take the oath and say he wasn't paid. The Gemara says, well, if that's the case, let him take it without an oath. No, we want the Balabayas to be calm. And if you're just going to allow people to take the money from him without an oath, he's going to be too stressed. So the Gemara says, well, why don't we establish that he has to pay him with witnesses? Why don't we say the employer should give out the money and there'll be two witnesses? The Gemara says, you're going to create another level of bureaucracy every time you want to pay somebody? You have to have two witnesses? Why doesn't we say that the employer has to pay him in advance? And that way, he won't be busy. And then he'll have worked all day. So Gemara says, no, Shnei wrote about Kafan. Nobody wants that. Everybody wants him to be paid to work on credit, because the worker wants to work because he knows he'll spend the money all day on soda, cigarettes, if he gets paid early, and the employer doesn't want to pay till the last possible second. The Gemara says, well, if that's the case, on the top of if that's the case, that the reason why they instituted this is because the employer is too busy, I feel it's nami. Even in a circumstance where they establish the amount, the law should be that the employer gets to swear how much he promised him, and then take that money. Alamatanya, but why do we learn in the Brisa? If the worker says, you promised me, let's say, $2 an hour, no, I only promised you one. Allah, all of a raya that the burden of proof is not on the employer, but is not on the employer, but on the employee. What's the difference? The Gemara says, the employer is not going to forget how much he promised. He might forget if he paid, but he's not going to forget how much he promised. If that's the case, well, even if the case is that the employer is so busy, forgets who he paid, it should be the law that even if the employee asks for the money much later on, it should be the case that the employer gets to take an oath and take the money. That when do we say the employer can get the money? Only if he takes the oath right away. But if he passes a period of time, then he can't do it. But why? If the employer was too busy, well, maybe he doesn't know. Gemara says no. It's a prohibition to delay, to not pay your workers on time, and the assumption is that the employer must have paid him on time. So if he's making the complaint later on, he has to bring a proof. Well, let's just see. Finish their argument before we analyze the logic. Gemara says, but maybe he intended to pay, but he was too busy. Gemara says, Hani mili mikmade dolimtes man chiyuva. Now, when do we say that we're concerned that the worker didn't pay, that the employer didn't pay? That's only before it came time to pay. Then it'd be in violation of the prohibition. You have a 12-hour period to pay. But kimatis man chiyuva, but when the time comes, ramay anav shemitkar, meaning to say, within those 12-hour period, that we trust the employer, but the employee. But once it reaches that period, then the employer would have paid everyone. So we're arguing about within that 12-hour period. So the Gemara says, the chisacher over mishum bal tigzol. You mean to say, you say the employer has a presumption that he paid because he's not going to violate the prohibition of do not delay the payment. But you're saying that the employee will violate the prohibition of do not steal? The Gemara says, no, well, that by the employer, there's two presumptions. We know that he's not going to be in violation of, do not delay. And also, we also have another presumption that the employer is not going to wait to get his money. He wants it right away. So that's why we assume that after the time where he should have paid him, that if he then comes along with a claim that he wasn't paid, he has to bring a proof. Did you have a question, Jeff? Okay.
I was thinking that this applies.
You know what?
Mentioned concern swingers and flags. Lots of work and something playing makes this kind of swears.
Well, you know what? The point is that these are general rules, but if there are different circumstances, then the circumstances will change. It will apply it differently. So Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Shmuel, Lo Shanu, this law that the worker takes an oath and takes the money, that was only taught to Ela Shesacharo Be'edim, only where that he was hired in front of workers. Aval Secharo Shalo Be'edim. Let's say he hired him without witnesses. Then he could always claim I never paid you. He could also say I hired you and I gave you your money. So therefore, since he could have said I never hired you, so therefore we believe him to say that I hired you and paid me. Amrulay Rabbi Yitzchak, Yasher, v'chein Amar Rabbi Yochanan. He says, yeah, that's true, and that's what Rabbi Yochanan said. You follow that? No, he's saying It's not a partial admission because he could have said, I never hired you in the first place. When he says, I hired you and I paid you, it's not an admission. He's just saying he had a migu. He could have said, I never hired you in the first place, and he would have been believed. So we see from here, Mikal, the Polygoy, Reish Lakish. So Reish Lakish must argue with Rabbi Yochanan. Some say no. Reish Lakish was drinking at the time and he couldn't respond, and that's why he was quiet. And therefore, Rabbi Yitzchak didn't hear if he argues with Rabbi Yochanan. No, Reish Lakish was pondering it. He was quiet. And Rabbi Yitzchak left in the meantime, and so that's why he didn't respond. In Marnami, indeed, we learned Amar Rav Menashe Bar Zvid Amarav Lo Shanu Ela Shesacharo Be'edim Avschar Shlo Be'edim Midol Sheyachol Amor Tzachaticha Om Yachol Amor Oscha Tzachaticha V'Natati L'cha Eskarcha. The same idea that he said in the name of different Amorayim. This teaching is so beautiful. Amalei Rava, my Malyasa, what's so beautiful about it? If we'll say that we believe the Balabayas that he could have always say it never happened, well, if that's the case, when the Torah says that if you're a watchman, that you have to take an oath, how will we ever have a circumstance where the watchman has to take an oath? We could have said, Mitoch sheyachol omer lo ayu dvar me'om, yachol omer lo ne'enso. Because the watchman could have always said, and we never learned that a watchman has to be with witnesses, that he has to give him the object to watch with witnesses. Since he always could have said, I was never never had in the first place, we believe him to say that it was an accident. Maybe exempt. So the Gemara says, well, maybe every case is a watchman. So with witnesses. So we have to say that when the Torah obligates you to take a Shevuos Shomrim, the Afkid Leba Eden, that's only when you gave them with witnesses. The Gemara says, well, still, Mitoch Sheyachol Omer Lo, Hechazarti B'cha Yachol Omer Lo Ne'ensa. Well, still, every watchman could have said, I returned it to you, therefore it's also believed to say, it was an accident. The Gemara says, no, the Afkid B'shtara, no, I gave him the deposit with a document, so we can't return it without witnesses. We call it Travayus sphere, so it must be that both Rava and Rami Bar Chama are of the position Shemavkid Tzachavero Be'edim Ein Tzarech Achzero Be'edim B'Shtar Tzarech Achzero Be'edim. Must be that they both are in the position that if you gave it to him, the deposit with witnesses, you don't need to return with witnesses, but with a contract you do. So Kari Rami Bar Chama Eidir Rav Sheshis. So the Gemara is going to, okay, this is going to take us, we have an introduction, we'll stop here. We'll bring this up for tomorrow's daf, a beautiful daf, but we'll talk to the piece about Rav Sheshis tomorrow. We'll stop here, a big shikayach to everybody have